Isaiah chapter 58. Isaiah chapter 58, we're going to look at verses 6 through 10 today. Isaiah 58, verses 6 through 10. Isaiah 58, 6 through 10. Now here's the reading of God's word. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and to bring the homeless poor into your house? And when you see the naked, to cover him, and not to hide yourselves from your own flesh? Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, Here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness, if you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and your gloom be as noonday. According to one study that I read recently, the poverty rate in America stands at about 10%. Poverty rate in America stands at about 10%. However, they note that there are some counties within the U.S. where it's more than 30%. Back in November or October, we had the missionaries who are serving in the Navajo mission, right? Navajo Nation. One of the things for them, the statistics for their communities will be significantly higher, those who live in poverty. I had a friend who was the president of a Bible college in Anchorage, and he shared with me the majority of his students come from the northern parts of Alaska. These are Eskimo students from Eskimo tribes out in the bush countries of Alaska. They come from extreme poverty. In Alaska, the Eskimos are the equivalent of the Navajo Nation, the Indians who live on the Indian reservations. There, the statistics shows that the poverty rate is much higher, 30% or more. So I did some digging. I said, the national average is around 10%. What about in the communities that you and I live in? Washington County, 8.6%. Multnomah County, 12.4%. Clackamas County, 8.4%. Marion County, 13.1%. This is just some communities within our, where you and I, we work, we live. And honestly, when I saw the percentage for our area, I was a little surprised that it's so high. Anywhere between 8 to 13% in the greater Portland metro area, including Salem. I knew that there were people who are living at or below the federal, levels of poverty. And in some way, I guess, the more I thought about it, then the more I realized, there are 3 or 4 schools within the Beaverton School District, elementary school, where it is 100% free lunch because majority of the families in that school community are at or below the level of poverty. So when you start looking at the numbers a little bit, then you realize 8.6%, it seems like it's a lot higher. This is from a 2021 or 2020, was it 2020 when we did the census? So these numbers are coming from the most recent census that was collected. I guess what was really eye-opening in many ways is that every community has those who are living at or below the federal poverty levels, where they are struggling to have adequate food, clothing, housing. That's modern day today, but in our passage today in Isaiah, We see that it was also similar in the time of Isaiah. Isaiah has, in his book, Isaiah repeatedly addresses the care for all people. He exhorts his hearers to recognize the poor among them and to offer relief. In this week's lesson, we see a wonderful, timeless teaching for us in our church today of our Christian obligation to the poor in our churches and in our communities. This section focuses on fasting. God calls out those who fasted because it was not genuine. There was no change in their lives. We started in verse 6 today, but if you just look at a few verses before, verses 3 and 4, this is what it says. Behold, in the day of your fast, you will seek your own pleasure and oppress all your workers. Behold, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to hit with a wicked fist. Fasting like yours this day will not make your voice to be heard on high. Beginning of verse 3 is the Israelites, their response is, have we not fasted and you not take notice? Have we not done this and we hear nothing from you? They were pointing to the evidence of fasting as their humility. They thought they were doing good because, they were doing noble thing of fasting. But God calls them out and he points out that fasting, although it gave the appearance of humility, it actually resulted in exploitation and violence is what we read. He says, in the day of your fast, you seek your own pleasure and oppress all your workers. You fast only to quarrel and to fight. The people thought that they were humble before God. They thought that they could be pleased, that God would be pleased with their fasting, these external actions. But while they fasted, they oppressed their workers. They fought with one another. They went through the external motions of the fast, but God rejected such empty rituals. God lays out then what he desires in our passage today. God would rather see them stop oppressing others, begin to help the poor. Then and only then will he accept their worship and answer their prayers. Fasting, unfortunately, can easily become an empty ritual. We fast, we go through the motions, we abstain from food or drink or whatever it might be. We pat ourselves on the back, and what do? We break the fast with a massive feast. Almost as if wow, I suffered, I deserve this. When I was doing youth ministry, we did a 30-hour famine and through World Vision, and same thing here with our students several years ago. We did the 30-hour famine. I know that because my parents have always taught me, when you fast, when you break the fast, eat chuk, which is like rice porridge, right? Because your stomach can't handle an increase of food all of a sudden after a long period. So for your own sake, you break the fast with chuk. So that's kind of how I've watched it happen, my parents doing that way. And so when I first did the 30-hour famine, I said, that's what we're going to do. We're going to break it with chuk. So I asked some of the moms to come and make it. The moms felt so bad that their kids went 30 hours without food. They not only made chuk, but they did meats and all these other dishes. I was like, don't eat that, guys. They're like, no, I'm hungry. So they just chowed down on it. What happened? Stomach ache. Fasting. The people were fasting. They thought they were doing something noble. But God says, you know what? That's not the type of fasting that I desire. Fasting can easily become an empty ritual. So there is a warning against the empty ritual. What we must do then to avoid these empty rituals. Let me share a couple points from our passage this morning. First is this, that God calls us to be merciful and just. God is telling his people, if you want to fast the way that pleases me, stop oppressing others. Look at verse 6 once again. Is not this the fast that I choose? Now he begins to list the various things, right? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. This kind of pictures the way that people were living at the time. God is pointing out that they were doing and directing them to the opposite way. Verse 6 describes the things that the people had to stop doing. Because this is what was happening. This is what they were doing to others or to one another. To loose the bonds of wickedness, it says in ESV. The other translations use the word injustice. To loose the bonds of injustice. What were the so-called believers doing in their communities? They were clearly not meeting the needs of those around them. They were ignoring them. To undo the straps of the yoke. Yoke is in farming, yoke is a little piece of wood that connects two maybe oxen together, right? But yoke also is described as a heavy burden. It's a burden. So what's happening is that they were putting this burden on one another. God is telling them, stop oppressing other people. Stop putting the heavy yoke of burden on others. What was that? We're not told what that is, but perhaps pressure like, hey, I'm fasting. I don't see you fasting. Maybe it was pressure to do or conform to their rituals. They were oppressing others, and God is telling them to stop that. They were fasting regularly, and yet at the same time mistreating other people. So God says, break every yoke that is oppressing others. Be merciful and just. This is a call to live not only for self. The people's actions, although it contains the element of spirituality like fasting, actually reveals a selfishness. They fasted for selfish gain. They fasted for recognition from God. Jesus addresses this type of behavior in the New Testament as well, doesn't he? He calls out the Pharisees for what? Their external motions, going through fasting. Their righteous or pious prayers in public. So God is calling us to be merciful and to just. Second thing is that God calls us to act lovingly. He says, love other people. Look at verse 7. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked to cover him, and not to hide yourselves from your own flesh? What we do when we see others in need shows our faith. It shows our faith or the depth of our faith much more than these empty rituals. How we respond to those in need shows how deep our faith is. God is telling us that we must provide for any need. God is telling those who are voluntarily fasting, okay? This is the irony. There are people who are voluntarily fasting, therefore voluntarily experiencing hunger. He's saying to those who are doing that, he says, help those who are forced to live in hunger. They were ignoring the poor around them. Not only should you feed them, but to shelter them. Shelter those who have no shelter. Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46, Jesus kind of teaches on this a little bit. So I want to read 31 through 46. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on the left. That the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? Verse 40, and the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did to me. Verse 41, then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger and you did not welcome me. Naked and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison and you did not visit me. They will also answer, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison, and did not minister to you? Then he will answer them, saying, truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into the eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Jesus says that everything done to the hungry, thirsty, a stranger in need, naked, the sick, was also done to him. We show love for God by loving those who are made in the image of God. Every single one of us, we are made in the image of God. I don't know what your response is when you see a person in need. I'm not talking about the homeless person on the street only. I'm talking about there are people all around us that have needs. There are times when you hear about a person, a family that is in need. What is your response? How have you responded? When we see the hungry, the stranger in need, the naked, the sick, Jesus says, help them. God calls out the wickedness of the people for their refusal to help even their family. At the end of verse 7, we see this little part, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh. Things were so bad that they were hiding from their own flesh. Why would you be hiding from your own flesh? What that means is that they were hiding because they refused to help even their own family members. I can't imagine not helping my family members if they were in need, or them not helping me when I am in need. I'll be so angry if that was the case. To be like to my younger sister, what's up? Right? I can't imagine that. We would do that not just to our families, but we extend that to our friends. What is happening here is that you hide yourself from your own flesh. If they are unwilling to help their own family, what hope does the poor have in that community then? What about the widows and the orphans? God calls us to act lovingly. He says, act lovingly towards others. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 46, it says this, for if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? Tax collectors were viewed as a very, very lowly. So he's saying, you know what? What good is it if you love those who love you? Even the lowly tax collectors whom you despise, even they do that. On the flip side, what is it? Love those who don't love you. Love those who have need. Simply help meet their needs. You know, homelessness is a growing problem. I think one of the major differences of when I moved away out of Portland in the early 2000s and when I came back in the mid-2010s, one of the biggest differences I saw was the sheer number of people living on the streets in and around Portland. I was actually very shocked. We live in a city that's very attractive for homeless, and there are many, many reasons. Some of the top reasons is one, there's a lot of NGOs out there in Portland, a lot of organizations that provide resources and services to the homeless. To the point that there was a video that kind of went viral recently. One of the news channels, I think, interviewed a homeless woman who was like, oh man, living on the street is great. I get fed 3 times a day. Every once in a while, they swing by, they give me a tent, they give me a tarp, whatever I need, it's there. I can do whatever I want to. We party all the time. We get high all the time. I was like, wow. And so it went viral. It attracted all this attention. So another news crew went out there. They found the person. And then she kind of started backchecking a little bit. Like, well, I mean, life is a little hard. It's not something that I wish, that all of us don't want to be on the street. But that's one of the major things of Portland is there's tons of services out there. A lot of groups out there. Second thing is that, unfortunately, they can also pretty much be and do whatever they want to. The city leaders in Portland are trying to change that. And we were driving through the downtown yesterday, and we felt like visually, things are getting a little better. I don't know if it's because it's winter and they're all somewhere else, but it seems to be less in and around Portland. I mean, we still see them, not as much as before though. So they're trying to change that. But third reason why the homeless are so attracted to Portland is because drugs are cheap and readily available. I've been told that homeless youth, Portland has number 1 in terms of population in the nation of homeless youth. Why? Drugs are cheap. They can get anything and everything that they want. So homelessness is a very significant issue, and there's a rise of that. But homeless people are just naturally attracted to Portland for these various reasons. Other people talk about climate, it doesn't get too extreme. It's easy to turn our eye from the needs of those because we struggle to relate to them. We think, you know what? Why can't they get the help? Why can't they just get a job? Why can't they just accept the help that is out there? They choose to live on the streets. We think those are some of the solutions. There is no easy solution or one that has worked very well. There are many reasons why they're on the street. But one of the common themes throughout all of them, at least those who I've met who are homeless, is they usually have no family support. They don't have a support system where there are people that they can go to get help. I am reminded of a person I met about 9 years ago in San Francisco. He wasn't homeless. He had a place to live. He lived in a government-subsidized hotel in Old Town in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. There are small old hotels that no longer is used as a hotel. They're used by individuals or what they call single resident occupancies, SROs, 1 person per unit. And it's subsidized through the government. Therefore, these people, like this guy, he gets money from the government on the first of the month. Money goes to rent, rest for food, and unfortunately for drugs and alcohol that they all seem to be struggling with. But I remember meeting him one day. He told me, hey, I'm dying. I have cancer. It's ravaged my body. I'm tired and weak from my treatments. And one of the things I asked him, and as we were talking, is that he was alone. He had no family support. He lived there by himself. He didn't go anywhere. He didn't do anything. He had no support. I'll never forget the feeling of helplessness. I was like, what can I do for this guy? I'm here in San Francisco for 1 week. It's this quick ministry in and out. I shared that although he might feel alone, that God knows him, that God knows what he's going through, that God will see him through. I listened to his story. I prayed for him. I invited him to come out. I said, hey, there's a service Wednesday night. Come out. There's a service on Sunday. You know right around the corner. City Impact is right there. You know it. Come out. They have health clinics twice a week. Go out. Get checked out. What else can they do? They have services. They can help you. Get into the discipleship program there. You can come out of your single residence occupancy, come into community with other men. I got his name and contact information. I passed it on to the director in hopes that maybe they would connect. But he had no family. I can't imagine what it's like going through for him active chemo treatment and all of these things without any kind of a support around him. He said his only support was the nurse that took care of him. That's the only person he said that he talks to usually during the week. So the fact that we have no family support is significant, right? But even those who had family support in the time of Isaiah, it's almost like they didn't have it. They were in need, and the family members who could help them simply ignored them, hid from their own flesh. That's how selfish they were. They were neglecting the duties to assist family members who were in need. The people's hearts were off. And no amount of fasting could help them draw closer to God because this was a major blocking. They only loved themselves. Their fasting was in vain. So God says, this is the fasting that I love. This is the fasting that I want you to do, is to be merciful and just and act lovingly towards other people. Stop hiding, stop oppressing, help the poor. Fasting alone is nothing if you are ignoring these issues and these needs that are around you. So he continues on. He says, if you follow these guidance and the directives and the instructions that I have, if the people follow the Lord's instructions, then there's our promises. The promises that they will experience God. Look at verse 8. Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. We see some of the promises of God. If the people fasted as God directed, then in verse 8, it says that the light will break forth like the dawn. In the book of Isaiah, light is often a symbol for salvation. Break forth implies what? A sudden bursting forth. If you've ever been outside, if some of you guys are morning people, so you're up when it's dark, or you're forced to because of work. When you're outside before the sun rises, it's amazing how quickly things change from the darkness to the light. What was hidden in darkness is exposed by light. In a matter of minutes, everything changes. The imagery is that of people who follow, if they would follow the Lord's instructions, they will see that sudden change in their lives. Like a burst, like the breaking forth of dawn. This light will come. In verse 3, the Israelites, they were complaining that God seems to be ignoring, or he doesn't take note of their fasting, their rituals. God tells them that because they are empty rituals, the reason why they are not getting the response from God is because they are simply empty rituals. If they follow God's instructions, do as God directed, then they will see the change in their lives. God's promise is also that he will be with them. He says this, your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Here, what we see is the imagery of the Exodus, right? In the Exodus, what do we see? Cloud, the pillar of fire, right? That signifies the presence of God, not just going and leading them. During the day, what did the cloud do? It provided them shelter, protection from the sun. And as they were camped, before they crossed the Red Sea, as they were camped at nighttime, what did they see? They looked behind, and what do they see? Pharaoh and his army marching, racing towards them. And they are just starting to back up towards the edge of the Red Sea, freaking out. If you read that passage, what happens is the pillar of fire stands between the Israelites and Pharaoh's camp. That happens. Why? Because then Moses stretches out his hands and the waves toss and churn. And it creates this path. Israelites walk through. Cloud and the fire lifts. Pharaoh and his army, they pursue. They cross, waters come back. This is the imagery that we see. God says this, your righteousness shall go before you, the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Not only that, he continues in verse 9. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, here I am. In a sense, this is what the people wanted. This is what the people wanted most. For the Lord to answer, that when they cry out for him to say, hey, here I am. They wanted to hear from God. They wanted to know that God was near, that God had not abandoned them. They thought their fasting was a means to accomplish that. It didn't give them the result that they wanted. Why? Verse 6 and 7 tells us they were oppressing others, ignoring the poor, laying a heavy yoke on others. They did not show care, love, mercy towards those in need. They even hid from their own family members who were in need. They were selfish. Once again, we see more language as we continue on. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness. Yoke is a symbol of oppression. Stop oppressing other people. To the putting forth of the finger, it's like what I see or picture, this image, right? It's like somebody's just talking down. These are the things that are happening in this community. These are the things that are hindering the very thing they want, which is what? The Lord to answer. God says this all needs to be laid aside. If God's people were to hear answers to their prayers, all of this must be laid aside. Be merciful and just. Act lovingly. If you do these things, the Lord will answer, here I am. Could it be that our prayers are not answered because our lives are marked by the pride, the arrogance? One final promise that God gives here at the end of verse 10, or in verse 10, is this. He says that your gloom will be like the noon or the noonday. Your gloom. The noon is usually the brightest part of the day. It's when the sun is at the highest. It says your gloom or your darkness will be like the noonday. Things will get so bad, things will improve to the such that your gloom, your darkness or your darkest days will only be as bad as the noonday. Just think about that imagery. To say that your gloom will be like the noonday or the darkness will be like the noonday tells us it's not that dark. It's in fact the brightest time. God's presence will be with us. Let me invite the worship team up. Fasting without addressing these issues, fasting without the change, without the meeting the needs of those around us is meaningless, is empty. This is what Isaiah is telling the people. This is what God is saying. Hey, you fasting, it's great, but you're also ignoring this massive need that exists in your community. Why do we fast? Isn't it so that we draw closer to God? Yes, we might fast from certain things, but it's not just about abstaining from something. When we fast, it's not just, I want to fast just because, I want to not eat for a few days. The list in verse 6 and 7 have more to do with adding righteous actions and actively obeying the law. It's not only about what we don't do or what we don't eat during a fast. The more important thing is that what we are doing during the fast. When we fast, aren't we praying also? And I was taught by my parents that during the time of fasting, during the time that you would normally be eating, they're like, you need to be praying. I go back to the 30-hour famine. World Vision has a little packet. It says, hey, here are some suggested activities for you to do. The purpose of 30-hour famine is not just sit there and say, oh, man, I'm so hungry, for moral support. They say, go serve in a soup kitchen. Go out into the community. They say, be active. Why? You're abstaining from food, yes, but at the same time, what you need to do is be involved in the community. It's a challenge to focus on the community service. As students are fasting, they want groups to get out into the community, serve those who are in need. God is pointing out to the empty rituals of the people, and it's a great reminder for us today as well. It's easy to fall into the trap of religious or empty religious rituals. And unfortunately, fasting can be one of those things. There are many things that we can fall trapped into. But God is pointing out the empty rituals of the people. He says, the fasting that I desire is to stop oppressing others, be merciful and just, help those in need. What are we doing? How are we responding to the needs of those around us? Let's reflect upon that as we worship and respond in song this morning.